Hello and welcome, everyone. Please help me welcome today Sarah Addison Allen, who's here to discuss our book of the month, Other Birds. Sarah is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 novels. She was born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Beautiful, beautiful place. She brings the full flavor of her Southern upbringing to bear on her fiction, a captivating blend of magical realism, heartwarming romance, and small town sensibility she describes as Southern fried magic realism. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Welcome, Sarah. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I enjoyed this book so much, and so many people did. There have been a lot of comments and a lot of reviews and people posting about the book and how much they enjoyed it. And honestly, I have never read anything that I knew at the time was called magical realism. So I kind of like I really did not know what I was getting into, and at first I was like, can I get this book to my mom? I'm not sure, um, but I did, and she loved it. But I wasn't sure. So how did you is this like how did you get into magical realism? Tell us about that. It was that your first, oh, I want to write magical realism, or how did this happen?
I had no idea what magical realism was until I was in college and I took a course. It was taught in one of the lit courses I took,
Mhm.
and I've said this so often, but it's so true. It was like opening a geode and finding the sparkle inside. It was
Oh.
so captivating to me that this type of writing that takes something magical and puts it into a real world setting. It's not fantasy, it's not
Mhm.
otherworldly. It is something in which you put something unreal and it
Mhm.
becomes real in this setting of
Right.
fiction. And truthfully, I didn't even think about writing it until much later when I was trying to get published and I was trying different things, and I sort of came back to it when I
Mhm.
realized that it was sort of part of my voice. It was part of who I am as a reader. So when I let go and said, okay, I'm going to write the book I want to write. Magical
Mhm.
realism was a part of that. Romance was a part of that. Southern fiction was a part of that. Every aspect of who I am as a reader came out as a writer, and that's when my career started. When I sort of let go and I wrote as a reader, really.
Mhm. That's interesting, and I've kind of always tried to do that, to, like, write, what I feel drawn to as a reader, and all of those elements are in many books that I love. The whole Southern piece, the element of sort of the divine, of magic, or however you want to, and then also a little bit of the mysticism, the ghosts and like that. So all these different, oh, food. We'll get to the food in a minute. So, oh, the food. So you still live in Asheville, is that right?
I do. I've lived
Yeah.
here almost all my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. I'm actually from North Carolina, which is where I'm talking to you from now. And I grew up in Middle North Carolina, and we would go to the mountains, for a weekend or for an afternoon, a Sunday afternoon, or whatever. But then later, I lived in Greenville, South Carolina, for most of my life, and of course, that's in Asheville's backyard. We're
Right.
practically neighbors, and actually, we're in the midst of moving back to Greenville, so we're going to be almost neighbors again soon. So
Oh my gosh,
hopefully,
yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. I love it. Um, anyway, I'm sorry. I digress. This is about you, not me. Um, so I always like to start with a book setting. So you're a mountain girl, and
Mhm.
you have written this beautiful tale that takes place in Mallow Island, South Carolina. I'm reasonably certain that's a fictional place. I did Google it. Was this suggested by a real island?
It's sort of a mashup of many
Hmm.
South Carolina islands. When the genesis or the my first spark of the idea for this book, I knew I wanted to take it to the South Carolina coast,
Hmm.
and because that's where my family vacationed
Right.
when I was younger. Well, at least my mom and my sister and I went. My dad never liked going to the beach, so he would stay home and grow a beard. And when I came back home, he's like, "Dad, is that you?" But we always went to the South Carolina coast, and so I was at first going to set it in Charleston. It was going to be my first book set in a real place. But then
Mhm.
I realized I was getting bogged down in the details instead of letting the story flow. So I said, okay, fictional, fictional. Let's go to an island. Let's make it famous for marshmallow candy. Let's make it full of ghosts and low country cooking. And that's how it started. And the
Right.
characters grew out of that setting.
It was magical. It really was, and not because it's, that's the genre, but it was a magical book. All of the sugar in the air and the ghosts and everything. It was just a really really atmospheric story. So okay, so we have multiple questions about the Delawisps. People are very curious about these birds. Wait a minute. Before we get to the specific birds, the Delawisps, I want to ask you, there are so many birds in this book, and there's lots about the birds. And then, of course, you have that wonderful scene where I think he's Fraser at that point, and someone is talking, and maybe with Zoe, and he tells her that, about, he prefers other birds or whatever. And so, are these birds, all these different birds and their different personalities and quirks and everything, are they like a metaphor, or am I reading too much into this?
I deliberately went into it once I knew that this was the theme and that there were birds in the book. I went a little, Easter egg in it. So
Mhm.
there are little bird bombs dropped throughout the book in which, even when a sensation is referenced, it feels like like bird wings on the skin,
Mhm.
or Charlotte, who's a henna artist in the book, her favorite things to draw are birds. There's a little
Mhm.
reference like that throughout the book. Even some of the characters, there's the Henry Swallow or Henry Sparrow in the
Mhm.
book. And I didn't get that quote from Fraser right away. It came, I think I'd finished the book and I was trying to come up with a title to the book. And I put that quote about being an other bird
Mhm.
later in the book, and that ended up becoming the
Right.
title. So it was a deliberate sort of Easter egg hunt through the book.
Mhm.
So if anybody goes back and rereads it, they'll go, "Oh wait, there's a bird reference. Oh wait, there's a
Mhm.
bird reference." So I think it's sort of hidden, but it was deliberate. Yeah.
Right. It's very interesting. Now about the Delawisps. So Diane Grant asks, where did you get the idea for the Delawisps? They sound like beautiful birds.
I completely made them up because I didn't because I didn't. Well, I think one of the goals to magical realism is to make that idea of seamless magic. And
Mhm.
if I referenced a real bird and then I gave it sort of this personality that it didn't really have in real life, I think that would be taking the reader out of the story a little bit. In creating an entirely new species of bird called the Delawisp, I could make them little thieves, and I could make them almost sentient, and I had more latitude as a writer to
Right.
make them what I wanted. But yeah, I completely made them up.
Well, someone else had asked if they were a product of your imagination. Pamela Ashmore asked if they were, and some of these questions kind of cross into each other. But Janie Robles wanted to know. She just said, "I wanted to know more about the Delois, specifically Otis." So, is there anything that you can tell us about Otis?
Otis, yeah, I didn't have names for them at all until going back into the draft, and I realized, Fraser probably needed a favorite bird or a bird that sort of led the pack, and so
Hmm.
Otis is the oldest of the Delawisps, and he hangs around Fraser the most, and is probably the most cranky. But I like the idea of particularly, I think it's Otis that lands on Fraser's head,
Yeah.
and Fraser sort of wears him like a fancy hat. Um, I didn't know, and I think it's the only bird I actually gave a name to in the book besides pigeon, but of the Delawisps. So yeah, I think Fraser needed an old man bird companion.
Right. 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 That was very fitting. Very fitting. So now about Pigeon and Paloma and that whole part of the story, what made you think? What was the inspiration for this invisible bird? I mean, that was fascinating.
I w- I think in one of the earlier drafts, pigeon was more of a representation of Zoe's youth and how she's sort of she's going into adulthood, and so this invisible friend that she had, letting go
Hmm.
of it, it was going to be just sort of that metaphor of letting go of your childhood and boldly going forth into adulthood.
Hmm.
That was Pigeon's role at first, until I realized, and I don't know, should I give away a spoiler? Is this
Yes, this
okay?
is the book of the month. We've already read it and we've been discussing it, a little bit here and there. So everyone knows in these interviews there will be spoilers because it's so we can ask you questions like these. And
Excellent. Okay, I didn't want to give away anyone
yeah,
to
it's fine.
anything that if people hadn't read it, but Pigeon ended up being the ghost of Zoe's mother. And she wasn't at first. I thought Pigeon was just an invisible friend at first, and then the draft came. Later draft, Pigeon became the ghost of Zoe's mother. And once I realized that, the ending became completely clear to me, in which that I would drop little hints throughout the book about who Pigeon really was, but at the very end, I would reveal it. And so I didn't know at first. I thought it was just an invisible friend.
Two things you did a really good job with surprises on, and that was one of them. I didn't see that coming, that this was going to be Paloma, Zoe's mother, and the thing with Frasier and oh gosh, Roscoe Avenger.
Yes,
That
yeah.
did you know you were going to do that, or did that come to you later?
That came to me later as well. When once I realized, I went, "Oh wow, okay, these are the same person." I actually had to go back and put more clues in, because if it was a surprise to me, there was absolutely no hint leading up to it. So I actually went back and put
Uh-huh.
some hints as to who Frasier really was.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Uh,
So I love the way the book deals with found family. What was this something you set out to explore with this novel?
I did. When I had the idea of it being on an island and it being in a small sort of condo complex, I Zoe came on into the picture, and I knew she was going to lead the story. That's how it was going to open. This young woman, this 19, almost 19-year-old, um, moving in, and she's looking for traces of her mother. She's looking for some hint of who her mother was, because her father never talked about her mother. Her father was very cold, and she doesn't find her mother there. It's a what she finds is a sort of a condo. The condo belonged to her mother, but it was devoid of personality, so she didn't find her mother there. Little did she know that her mother's always been with her in the form of Pigeon. But I wanted Zoe to bring these outcasts in this apartment,
Mhm.
or this condo complex, together. So I knew from the beginning that it was going to be about found family. And I've joked about this before. My inspiration was almost like Melrose Place, only
Mhm.
not as soap opera. It's sort of like people who wouldn't necessarily associate with each other coming together because they live in this sort of
Right,
small place.
right. You have this ensemble cast, that all are brought together because where they live, um, and perhaps because she opens the story, I connected more with Zoe. Was there one of the characters that you connected with more? And I think you mentioned that you knew Zoe was going to kind of lead things, but did she come to you first? Was she your sort of entrance point to the story?
She was my first character. I knew I was going to lead with that. I knew the story was going to be about um, a young woman coming into a small condo complex. I knew that to begin with. Um, and then the rest of the characters just sort of formed around her, and
Hmm.
I love the rest of the characters so much that they sort of rose to be main characters
Right,
alongside her. But I think
right.
my favorite character in all of Other Birds is Camille, the ghost Camille, because she reminds me of my mom. Food is
Oh,
love. You
yeah.
extend a piece of affection
Hmm.
when you make something for someone, and give it to them in form of food. And that was so my mom. My mom was a very big Southern food pusher. I love you, so here, eat this.
Yes,
So
sounds like mine.
yes, yes, and I think that's why I love Camille the most.
Hmm. And she was a very compelling character, and I really enjoyed her as well. I wanted to ask you also about Roscoe, aka Fraser. I spent some time Googling Roscoe Avenger because I wasn't sure the way he was referenced in some of the I don't know if it's the jacket copy or some of the other material, and
Yeah.
it made it sound like, okay, this is a real person. And I thought, okay, is this a real person? Is this used that she used, or is this part of the story? And it took me a while to work out that yes, this was a product of your imagination as well. That was well done. But was there? And I wanted to go. Okay, I got off track here. See, I get so involved in all this and I get off track. But I guess I wanted to go back to Zoe for a minute because we were talking about her. And um, was there a sort of an inspiration for Zoe, someone that that was like or some situation that suggested this character, this 19-year-old who was searching for her mother? Did that come from somewhere, or did it just pop into your head one day?
Well, my niece is the same age as Zoe, so I was looking at her and her experience as in young womanhood, and the
Right.
sense of how you and I can remember very clearly what it's like to be 19 when you think that you know everything, when you have done all the growing that you need to do, and you are the smartest person in the room. When you walk into a room, you believe that when you're 19. So it was based on I think just a general idea of what it's like to be that age. But I think
Right.
Zoe comes at it in a way that is charming, and she's so open, and I don't want to say naive, but maybe innocent. And I think that is what opens the door to a lot of characters in the book, and how she brings them together with this simple exuberance about here's life, and she's charging forward, and she she influences the adult characters in much more
Right.
than adult characters influence her. But
Right.
I think I was looking at my niece. I was thinking about myself at 19, but I think Zoe is sort of her own character, though.
Yeah, got it. So right now, about same question with Roscoe. Did that character, was he suggested by someone or some situation, or did he arrive in your head fully formed from whole cloth?
When I knew that there was going to be when I knew the island was going to be famous, for several reasons, one of which a famous reclusive author lived
Mhm.
there. Um, I knew I wanted it to be a little Harper Lee To Kill a
Mhm.
Mockingbird kind of thing. That the book within the book, would Sweet Mallow would be sort of a To Kill a Mockingbird kind of
Got
book,
it.
and that Roscoe slash Fraser would be a sort of reclusive Harper Lee kind of character. I I really think I've done my job if I made people look up. Is Roscoe Avenger a real, or is he a
Oh,
real?
yeah, I was Googling him, and honestly, I was impressed with how many hits there were, but they were all about your book, and I'm like, wow,
I
this is
love
this is
that.
a
I
new
love
book,
it.
and this character in this book, there are a lot of Google hits for him. This is great.
I love that. That people have told me they've looked up the Devil Wisp to see if they're real, or if the Mallow Island is real, and that is not. There's nothing more validating to me that says I made it so believable that people looked it up to see if it was real. That's just it does my heart good. But I think it was based on Harper Lee. That was the kind
Yeah.
of book. That was the kind of significant book I wanted it to be.
That was very, very well done. Okay, so Sherry Powers asks, and I'm sure many of us are wondering, food is such a central theme of this story. You touched on this a moment ago. And she says one line that stood out is food memory from childhood. What kind of childhood food memories inspired this idea?
Oh, wow. So many things, particularly from my mom. And I reference some of them in the book. Things like my dad used to make potato chip sandwiches. There always had to be Lay's potato chips, and it had to be white bread. And you had to eat it with a glass of milk. And I know it sounds ridiculous and awful, but I think it's delicious because it reminds me of my dad when I was
Right.
a kid. And another one I referenced in the book that is a real food memory for me is cornbread in a glass of milk. My
Mhm.
mom would make cornbread, and here's a scoop. I don't like cornbread. I have never been a big
Really?
fan of cornbread, and I sort of built an entire character around a character who's a chef Mac who makes things with cornmeal. But my mom made it, and she would make it for dinner or whatnot, and the leftover the next day, she would crumble the dried cornbread in a glass of milk and eat it with a spoon. And so
Mhm.
that's a food memory for me as well. But
Mhm.
more generic ones are like Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid is such a big memory for me as a kid. Little things like that.
Yeah. The cornbread and milk, I mean, I love cornbread. I'm not one of those who didn't like cornbread, but I like it a little sweeter. I like a little sugar in mine and then put some butter on it. Oh, that's good. But crumbling it in milk, I've never done before. That sounds interesting.
And she would sometimes put it in buttermilk as well. But yeah, and eat it with a spoon. I will always remember that. Not in a bowl, but put it in a glass.
Mhm.
That's a big food memory of my mom.
Well, I'm going to try that. So, Claudia Ansel Reed wants to know. I wanted to ask Sarah what was her inspiration for this book. I did love it. So, we've touched on this in a couple of different ways. Is there anything that you haven't covered about the inspiration for the book in general?
Well, I started the book several years ago, and I had written some of it, and then my mom had a massive brain hemorrhage,
Mm.
and it left her unable to move and barely able to talk. And I watched her die for 4 years.
Oh,
It was a huge, impactful part of my life, in which, and I couldn't write through it. It was just so hard. And then 10 days before my mom died, my sister passed away. And so, there was a lot going on. And, as
you've.
like grief when it's new, it feels like this, I don't know, this sort of stone on your shoulder,
Mhm.
and it's so heavy you can barely walk, you can't function. That's what that kind of grief feels like. But after a while, it gets smaller and smaller until it gets the size of a pebble, and you hold it in your hand. But eventually you put it in your pocket and you walk around with it for the rest of your life. It's no longer that weight. And once I got to that point, I went back into the book, and I found that the book had an entirely different meaning for me once I got back into it,
Right.
because I knew there were going to be ghosts in the stories, and I knew there were going to be characters, who missed these mother figures in their life so much that these mother figures stayed around. But once I got into it after my mom and sister passed away, it was an entirely new dimension for me, and I think it has more weight, and it has more um, I don't know, veracity to it,
Mhm.
coming back into it after experiencing what I did. And so I think I didn't I knew it was going to have ghosts, and I knew it was going to be about mothers who had passed away, but I don't think I would have been able to put as much emotion and as much um, I don't know, pouring as much as myself into it had I not experienced that, and had I not been away from it for so long. I think there's 7 years between my last book and Other Birds. So, and that's the
Wow.
reason why.
This is obviously a deeply personal book for you, and just that I cannot imagine. I mean, everything you've been through in the last few years, that's such a rough patch. And how you even, or I mean, what a triumph to be able to finish the book, and to be able to move forward. And as you say, carry the pebble in your pocket.
Yeah.
That's amazing, and I love that analogy, or that's beautiful. Um, wow, that's just breathtaking.
Oh.
Um, okay, do you plan to revisit these characters? I, for one, want to know how their stories continue.
I, you know, I don't think I've ever written a book in which I said, there's more to these characters. I need to tell another story. But I thought I had ended Garden Skulls at a place where I knew, they were going to have their happily ever after. But it was only after it was a couple of years of readers saying to me, I love this book, I want to know what happens next, that my brain started going, well, what does happen next with the Waverleys of Garden Spells? And so I ended up writing First Frost, which is, the sequel to Garden Spells. So I'll never say never, but I think I I know that I've left these characters in a way in which they will get their happy endings. You know, I know that Mac and Charlotte are going to stay together. They have been through enough. In my head, I see them happily ever after. Now, with Zoe and Oliver, I'm not sure they'll stay together. I'm pretty sure they'll stay friends, but they're at such a young part of their lives. Who knows what their
Right.
happily ever after is going to be? But you know, I don't know. Maybe someday I will say, wow, I wonder what these characters are up to. But I don't think I've ever written a book in which I said, you know, this is just the start of a series or this or
Right.
anything like that. So I'll never say never.
I really want to know more about Mac and Charlotte and their future, and I want to know more about Zoe and her future, and I actually kind of like her with Oliver, but also I think, maybe there are some new tenants moving in at some point, and so I think you actually could write for those of us who are just who are invested in these characters. You could move some new people in and tell their story, and then fill us in on all these other characters and how they're doing while we're there.
That is a great
Just a
idea. I
thought.
never considered that. It's an idea of a condo complex is that people do move in and out. So,
Exactly.
wow, I'd never considered that. Yes, wow. See, now the wheels are turning.
Excellent. My plan has worked. Okay, so Tori Landis says this cover and the alternate cover are perfect for other birds. I'm curious if you had much input in cover design. And then she says, "Thank you for sharing recipes from your book."
Oh, yeah, I didn't have any, I really didn't have much input into the design themselves. It was later. It was only recently. It was in the past couple of months. My editor showed me some of the early drafts of the cover, and they were all sort of tropical. There were flowers and maybe
Mhm,
some colorful sort of houses. Um, and then all of a sudden burst onto it is other birds, this sort of dark blue cover with a cage and birds.
mhm,
And so that was the one that was shown to me, and it clicked. It was like, yes, of course, yeah, that's the cover. um
mhm,
I was asked input for Barnes and Noble's special edition. They gave me sort of this idea of it was going to be a lighter cover. Did I like sort of pale blue or the white? And I said, well, I really like that white, and that's what they ended up going with. But
mhm.
it was presented to me almost fully formed, which was a gift. Sometimes you get a cover, and you what do you say if the consensus is this is a great cover? You just go, okay, yeah. But even if you don't really like it, but no, I loved this cover. It spoke
It's
to the
beautiful.
story
It's
very well.
Yeah, it's a very good fit. Rebecca Kendall asks, I would really like to know where you get your inspiration for stories like this and your photo that begs for a story posts. Have you always had the talent to weave these sorts of stories? And then she says, P.S. I love your Dear Hannah post and photos so very much.
Oh my goodness, thank you for that. I recently concluded my Hannah stories. It was, after my mom and sister died. That was Hannah's mother and grandmother. I was cleaning out my mom's house, and I realized that, there are there are old pieces of clothing that were saved that Hannah had no idea why, and they were going to go to her. So I needed to write her letters and tell her stories about what these things were. So that was the inspiration behind that. It was, I needed a vehicle to um, give Hannah these stories.
Right.
And, being so young, and it's not something that she's digesting right now. So I wanted to have it in a form in which she could read later. So that was for that. With the short stories, I I think I've always been a daydreamer. So if I see something visual that inspires me, then suddenly the story's in my head. I've always been like that. I have created stories in my head all my life, being, this consummate daydreamer. Um, and so it was just sort of this natural process of putting it online, and basically I was away from writing for so long that it was part of my sort of trying to keep my creative wheel turning when I wasn't really
Mhm.
writing. I could do these tiny little micro stories, and it would sort of be this burst of creativity that would still, that would keep me satisfied. So it's like sort of like eating something sugary, like boom, there's your brain just for a second. It lights up your brain like sugar does. So that's what it was at first. And I'm so glad people have responded to them. That it's been gratifying. It was surprising to me that people have enjoyed them as much as they do. So I'm thankful for that. And in terms of books, it's never as easy because it's when I write something, I always think it's the worst thing I've ever written, and that is the joy and the curse of a first draft. You have to go back. Well, at least I do. I have to go back in and make it magical. I have to make it beautiful, because it's never a thing of beauty, that first draft. And I've said this often. I'm not a great writer, but I'm a pretty good rewriter. That's when the magic happens. That's when the beauty of the words happen.
Tell us something about yourself that we might not guess.
Oh my goodness. What might you not guess?
Some random thing. The crazier the better.
The crazier the better. Oh, let's see. Well, I don't like cornbread. I've already admitted that one. Let's see. I can twist my tongue into the shape of a 3-leaf clover.
Really?
Yes.
I will not ask you to demonstrate because it sounds painful.
It's not too bad. And I just did it, and it's been recorded. Yep.
Thank you for that.
Oh my gosh.
Well, we'll do an outtake and put it on the, make sure everybody see Sarah's, what did you call it again?
It's like a 3-leaf clover.
See Sarah's 3-leaf clover tongue. Okay.
You should have a blooper reel, Susan. You should, all these outtakes of interviews you do, you should have a blooper reel.
That is a good idea. Thank you. Okay. So what are you working on now? And is that your next book that will be out, or is there something else that's already in the pipeline that we're going to get next year? What's going on with you?
I have started writing the new book. Actually, the deadline to turn it in is in January. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to be out next year. It might be out late next year or maybe early the year after. But it feels good to get back into this sort of pattern of, you write a book, you promote it, it comes out, and then you get back into the swing of things with writing again. Because I was away from it for so long that it just feels like it's this really great sense of normalcy when things were not normal for so long. It's a new normal now that, getting past all that dark stuff, but it's a good new normal. And so I am writing it, and it's set in North Carolina, this one, and it's set in during the rainiest season, or the rainiest summer that this area has ever seen. And when I started writing it last year, it was during the time when Tropical Storm Fred sort of barreled through Western North Carolina and caused a lot of damage in this area. And we had a very rainy summer, so the ground was saturated, and my office completely flooded. So it was a big deal. So I was starting the story during that rainy time, and so that it sort of influenced the whole atmosphere of the book, and how it's so wet and green, and secrets will be uncovered. So that's where I am right now.
Well, that sounds fascinating. I can't wait to read it. Do you have a title for that one, or?
No, I'm calling it Buttertown because that's the name of the town, but that's not going to be the title. But that's the file name on my computer right now.
Well, we will look forward to hearing more about that. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think we should know?
I don't think so. I don't think I can ever top the 3-leaf clover tongue thing. So I think
that was amazing. Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. It's just really great to talk to you. And I appreciate you sharing all of this, and some of it, very personal, and also the tongue thing. That was great. So
I can't believe I did that in his recording. Yeah.
You know what? We're an easy group. We like you. We're happy to have you. And it's a private group. It's not one of those public ones, where just anybody can wander in. So you're safe. You're among friends. It's all good.
Oh, that's
Thank you
great.
so much for doing this. We
Oh.
really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing more about Buttertown and whatever else you write. But please do bear in mind that we would like to go back and spend more time with the Delawisps.
The wheels are turning. Yep.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Susan. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.